All right, this is the test review for the Stearns chapters 17 through 20 test that you'll be taking next week. Now, again, I say this every time, this is not exhaustive. This is just to get you studying along the right lines. There may be a surprise or two still on the test, but if there weren't, then you probably wouldn't study that hard. So Drag and I want you all to do your best studying, but we do want you on the right track. So question number 1, give a detailed overview of Portuguese and Spanish exploration. It's important to note that the Portuguese and the Spanish were first on the scene in the New World with their exploration. Even prior to that, it was the Portuguese that led the way with exploration, primarily promoted by people like Prince Henry the Navigator. They started exploring off the coast of Africa, places like Azores, which would be in the Atlantic Ocean. Most of the claims that the Portuguese and the Spanish had was in the southern hemisphere along the coastal areas. Also make sure that you make a note that the Spanish were largely motivated by religious zeal, and you also want to be familiar with the Treaty of Tordesillas, which is where the Pope basically drew a line of latitude and said Spain is going to take things to the west of the line and the Portuguese will get the things to the east. Number 2, list the major European maritime explorers and what are they known for. Be familiar with men like Vasco da Gama. He was the first to go around Africa to India and back. Diaz, he was actually the first one to go around the southern tip of Africa. You also need to be familiar with Magellan, who is known for circumnavigating the globe. Columbus's discovery of the New World. There may be a couple more that you need to know about. Be familiar with Vasco da Gama. When he makes it to India, the Europeans had much more to benefit from than the Asians did as far as trade went with the Europeans. The Asians were not that impressed with European goods, but the Europeans were quite impressed with the things that they had in Asia. Columbian Exchange. This is question number 3. This is the trade network between Europe, Africa, and the New World. It's the exchange of food, animals, people. Diseases were spread, and arguably diseases brought the largest changes due to contact in the New World. Number 4, a detailed overview of English and French exploration. They showed up after the Spanish and the Portuguese. Therefore, most of the lands in South America were taken. So the French and the English take the lands in North America. They used indentured servants. Charter companies were more common in these colonies because there was more of a limited involvement with the government there. Question number 5, the religious conflict fought primarily in Germany during the 17th century. That's the 30 Years' War. Make sure that you know about Machiavelli for question number 6. He wrote a book called The Prince, and he's somewhat of a controversial character, because he talks about monarchs maintaining ruthlessness in order to accomplish the things that they desire to accomplish. Question number 7, who were Luther and Calvin, and what did they each teach? Well, these are Protestant reformers. These guys are heavy in the Protestant movement. Luther is teaching salvation by faith alone. German princes really latched on to the things that Luther was teaching. We'd like to believe mostly for religious reasons, but there was also some political benefits to challenging the church's authority in certain ways. John Calvin, be familiar with predestination. Question number 8, what is unique about the monarchy system of England? The monarchy system of England is unique because they are going to maintain a parliament. Question number 9, list the key players in the scientific revolution. The key players of the scientific revolution: Copernicus, heliocentric theory, the sun is the center of the universe. Brahe and Kepler take what he taught and moved it a little further and spoke somewhat about elliptical patterns of the planets revolving around the sun. Galileo and his telescope is important. Newton, physics and calculus. All of these men, these people during the scientific revolution, are very, very innovative. Question number 10, what were the key aspects of the commercial revolution, creation of great trading companies, and monopolies were very common during this commercial revolution time period in Europe. And number 11, significance of the Palace of Versailles. It displays the power of absolute monarchies, the most clearly structure in Europe that does that. I would take a look at the image on page 417, be familiar with that. Question number 12, describe the War of Spanish Succession. This is an argument on whether or not the French Bourbon family has the right to claim the throne of Spain. Be familiar with Philip, Charles. Those are two important characters. The Spanish tried very... I'm sorry, I skipped one. Ultimately, the Bourbons win that. Question number 13, give an account of Spanish politics in the New World. The Spanish government allowed private individuals to make claims for the crown in exchange for profit. The Spanish tried very strict and direct control over their colonies, viceroys, things like that. 14, who were the two major conquistadors and who did they conquer? Cortez primarily focused on taking over the Aztecs is what he's accredited for, and Pizarro it was the Incas. 15, describe some of the atrocities in the transatlantic slave trade. A lot of European nations incorporated slavery into their political and economic systems. The journey across the Atlantic was known as the Middle Passage. Men were favored as slaves over women in the transatlantic slave trade. This is going to be different in Islamic trade. In Islamic trade, women are going to be favored over men because they're more looking for domestic servants, versus the New World for the transatlantic slave trade. It's going to be more about having men that they want working in the mines and in the fields, specifically the sugar plantations and things like that. Question number 16, what was the Great Trek? This is really when the Europeans start to go into the interior of Africa. You want to look that up. It's a lot more detail that you need to know about that. Question number 17, describe some characteristics of sugarcane production, centered primarily in the Caribbean and Brazil, places like that. It requires a large amount of land and a large amount of labor. When it comes to question number 18, you just need to look up some information about Asante and Dajamio, and make sure that you're familiar with that. I'm sorry, this thing is so creepy, but I really appreciate the gift, Taylor. Thanks a lot. I wanted her to make it into a video. Short answers. You just need to be familiar with social classes. In the New World, there's going to be a graph that you're going to have to establish there. And women in the Enlightenment, be familiar with them. Check that out in the textbook. Good luck on your test.